Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Florida College Access Network webinar entitled Meeting the College Access and Success Needs of Rural Students. And I'm your host, Kimberly Lent. I am a Senior Research Associate at Florida College Access Network. If you need to reach me later on after the webinar, you can see my email address here. And if you want to tweet, which we always encourage during our webinars, you can reach me on my handle, KRLent. And today we are really excited to welcome three experts in the rural education field. The first is Dr. Jerry Johnson. Jerry is a professor of educational leadership at the University of Central Florida and serves as the co-director of the Institute for Research, Innovation, and Practice in Rural Education at UCF. Jerry's published over 50 articles in the area of rural education, and he recently co-edited a book called The Dynamics of Social Class, Race, and Place in Rural Education that looks at the intersections of class, race, and schooling as they manifest in rural settings. Jerry is also a former high school English teacher and principal, and from 2003 to 2007, he served as the Policy Research Director for the Rural School and Community Trust, a national nonprofit organization that researches and looks at the critical relationship between good schools and thriving communities. Our next panelist is Dr. Hobart Harman. Hobart is also a co-director of the Institute for the Advancement of Research and Innovation and Practice at the University of Central Florida. He is among the nation's leading experts on public education in rural America, and he has provided expertise to several of the nation's most important rural school improvement initiatives and reports funded by the U.S. Department of Education and the National Science Foundation. In addition, in 2009, Dr. Harman received the National Rural Education Association's Stanley A. Brzezinski Memorial Rural Education Research Award. And our final panelist is Dr. Matthew Olson. Matthew is a faculty member at the University of North Florida and academic coordinator at the Taylor Leadership Institute. He also serves as the director of the award-winning Camp Osprey Leadership Mentoring Program, which we're going to learn a bit more about later in the hour. Matthew provides leadership development for rural schools, teachers, and students in collaboration with the Northeast Florida Educational Consortium. For his efforts, Dr. Olson was also awarded in 2017 the WJCT NPR American Graduate Champion, the National Jefferson Award for Public Service, the United Healthcare Heroes Foundation Award, and the Work for Heart Award from the United Way of Gainesville. We are really excited to have these three gentlemen with us today. And Matthew does have a Twitter handle, so if you want to tweet at him during the broadcast, feel free. So a few housekeeping items. If you've joined us before, you'll know this. If not, welcome, and we'll go through this now. So we encourage questions and conversation throughout the broadcast. On the side panel, you can submit your questions. And also, we want you to share us on social media, shameless plug, at FL College Access, #FCAN. We will address your questions in one of two ways. If one of the gentlemen are talking and your question directly aligns with what's on the screen, I will interrupt them to quickly answer your question. If not, in the final 15 to 10 minutes at the end, we will address all questions. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available within a week of the broadcast. So if you are new to an FCAN webinar, welcome. A little bit about us. Our mission is to create and strengthen a statewide network that catalyzes and supports communities to improve college and career readiness, access, and completion for all students. And our big vision is for at least 60% of working age Floridians to hold a high quality post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2025. And we accomplish this in three ways. The first is through local college access networks. These are place-based organizations that bring together a coalition of stakeholders from a variety of sectors, including nonprofit, higher education, K through 12, philanthropy, government, and business, who set a goal to increase degree attainment in their local community and then set strategies to achieve that goal. Currently, LCAN serves 78% of Florida's population. The second arm of our work, which is where I live, is research and policy. We serve as a clearinghouse of data related to degree attainment and success and completion. And we publish things like dashboards, one-pagers that you can see here on your screen to help folks in the local community interact and understand data and use it actionably in their community. The last arm of our work are our statewide initiatives that fall under College Ready Florida. These campaigns look at those important steps that students take when they are getting ready to attend a post-secondary institution and help them and support them along the way. So as I said, we're really excited to delve into the issue of rural student success. It's something that FCAN hasn't addressed in quite a bit of time. So I'm going to go over quickly before the gentlemen start their content. I'm going to go over quickly what rural communities in Florida look like. And the key takeaway is there's a few ways to measure rural. And we were joking before that we could spend a whole webinar just talking about the different ways to measure this in Florida. So the one that we typically use is by the census. So using the census, 30 of Florida's 67 counties were classified as rural in 2010. In 2020, we will get new census data to update that figure. So within those 30 counties, 5% of Florida's total population, and also 5% of Florida's K through 12 students. And when we look at, because we're FCAN and we're looking at degree attainment, I wanted to give you an overview of what degree attainment looks like in rural counties versus non-rural. So in rural counties, 22.7% of adults have an associate's degree or higher. And when we compare that to our non-rural counties, that's 40.2% of their residents have an associate's degree or higher. And it's important, to look at this holistically. So a Florida Chamber analysis has revealed that many rural communities across Florida are experiencing negative population and job growth, which is again the reason that we're here today to talk about ways to support these students through college, stay in their communities, and build the economy in those local communities. So here's where it gets kind of tricky. There are different rural classifications that the U.S. Department of Education uses. And again, if you're interested in that, feel free to contact me or one of the gentlemen on this panel to get into that after. We can spend some time on that. But using that classification, 20 out of our 67 counties were classified as rural in 2017. So at this time, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Jerry Johnson as he introduces their topic and their content for today. So Jerry, all yours.
Thank you. So I probably have the least interesting part of the presentation. While Hobart and Matthew are going to talk about on-the-ground programs, I'm going to give you the research background to provide some foundational knowledge on what we know about rural student access, persistence, and success. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to be talking about the research evidence and barriers and promising practices, all of which come out of a pretty extensive literature review that was done just a few years ago. After that, we'll hear about some example innovations. So before getting into the findings, let me tell you a little bit about the process that was used to arrive at these conclusions from the research literature. We set out to address three questions. First question is, what is the status of rural students' enrollment in, persistence through, and completion of post-secondary education as suggested in the existing research? The second question is, what does existing research suggest are the barriers to post-secondary enrollment, persistence, and completion among rural students? And finally, what policies and practices does the existing research suggest show promise for improving those same outcomes, enrollment, persistence, and completion among rural students? To arrive at answers for these questions, we followed a systematic process of identifying the relevant literature and then analyzing it. I won't go too deeply into that, but we did a very extensive search that resulted in approximately 750 research articles and dissertations that we then systematically analyzed using a process called metasynthesis to arrive at these overarching themes that allow us to answer those questions. So we'll start with the status of post-secondary enrollment among rural students. First finding from the research literature, the enrollment rates of rural students are equal to or slightly below non-rural students when compared with urban and suburban students. They're very close. When you control for socioeconomic background, so you adjust for the family's income level and access to resources, the differences are statistically non-significant, which tells us that the differences in enrollment rates have more to do with assets and access to resources than they have to do with where people live. Rates vary considerably according to characteristics of the students. So those are socio-demographic characteristics like poverty, but also like race and gender and characteristics of the individual students. The rates vary within and across states. So within a state like Florida, you're going to see very different rates in, say, rural areas in the Panhandle than you might in rural areas in South Central Florida. And finally, enrollment rates differ with proximity to urbanized areas. So the communities where students live and where they attend school are categorized by the U.S. Department of Education in terms of being city, suburb, town, or rural. Within the category of rural communities and schools, there are three subcategories: fringe, distant, and remote. And that has to do with how close the rural area is to an urbanized area. And so fringe rural is right on the edge of an urbanized area. Distant is a little further out, and remote is even further out, if you imagine concentric circles around a city. So the enrollment experiences of rural students differ considerably based on how close they are within their rural area to a city, which probably means proximity to higher education opportunities, to colleges and universities. Okay. So status of completion rates among rural students. Again, they obtain post-secondary degrees at rates equal to or just slightly below the rates. Those differences disappear statistically when you account for socioeconomic background. And then finally, there's limited research on post-secondary persistence, so that, freshman to sophomore to junior to senior year, but the results for rural students appear to be pretty similar to the results for non-rural students.
All right, so at this time we are going to open our first poll. So, what is the greatest barrier to post-secondary rural student success? So you have an option of school factors, student factors, economic need, competing commitments to family. Give you a few more seconds to answer. Oh, we have a few more coming in. All right, so I'm going to close it now. So hopefully you can all see this on your, and I'm going to share it with you right now so you can all see it. So you can see the most common one that you all chose was competing commitments to family and community. Second to economic need, then student factors, and then school factors. So I'm going to close this poll and then bring it back to Jerry. All right, Jerry, all yours.
Okay, thank you. Can we go to the next slide?
Jerry, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Can we go to the next slide? Can you hear
sure.
me?
Yeah. You want barriers? You're on barriers right now.
I'm seeing the poll still.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second.
Oh, you have to close the. There we go. We're back.
All right, we should be back. Sorry about that, everyone. Technology's fun.
Yeah. So actually, can we go back a slide?
Yep,
Yeah.
there you go.
So the strongest barrier to enrollment, this is an important distinction. We'll look at the next slide in a second. The strongest barrier to enrollment is economic need. Second strongest is competing commitments to family and community, and then school factors, and finally student factors. Can we go to the next slide? The strongest barrier to persistence once the students have enrolled is difficulties in social adjustment. So key distinction there. The barrier to enrolling in the first place is different from the barrier for persisting once enrolled. So we can interpret this to suggest that while this economic barrier is the most important thing that keeps kids from enrolling in the first place, once they are enrolled, what it's going to take to help them stay and persist and be successful is finding a way to overcome these issues with social adjustments. And then finally, the primary barriers to completion, once they are there, once they persist, are student level characteristics. So the completion rates are lower for minority rural students. The completion rates are lower for rural students in poverty. So next slide, please. So some promising practices that come out of the research literature. So these are practices that are in place, that there's an evidence base behind them to suggest that they are likely to improve results in terms of enrollment, persistence, and completion. Dual enrollment programs, post-secondary campus visits and visits from higher education institution representatives, high-quality high school guidance counseling, and then school policies to promote post-secondary readiness. That's a really interesting lever that a lot of places don't take advantage of. So policies that require participation in certain activities that promote college and career readiness, curricular policies, those sorts of things. Okay, next slide. Some additional promising practices: preparatory courses for college entrance exams, preparatory courses for academic and social adjustment. That's key. The kind of courses that teach high school students those secret handshakes that you need to know to be able to navigate the labyrinth that higher ed institution can be. Mentoring programs, positive school climate measured in various ways. And then community engagement and community and parent support is another promising practice. So now we move on to Hobart, I believe.
Thanks so much, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be involved in this FCAN webinar. I'm located here in Virginia, and of course, my role at the Institute is helping you and others do some of the great work that's occurring there. And I'm privileged too to be able to participate with Matthew, who has an excellent program going on. And you see here that among the innovations that we want to note for the participants today, the Rural Math Excel Partnership Project that I was project director of, it was funded by the U.S. Department of Ed, and about a $3 million investment in the I3 program. An innovation that's called Nudges, personalized text messages that address the financial form filing and college enrollment and persistence among at-risk populations. And I think quickly most of us would consider rural populations at risk. And again, as Jerry pointed out, that will vary certainly based on where you are in the state and where you are in the country and along other kinds of ethnicity and other factors. And then Matthew will share with us the Collegiate Achievement Mentoring Program, OSPREY. It's a virtual leadership mentoring program, and that should be an excellent source for many people in Florida and in other states as well. Going to the next slide to give you some information about the Rural Math Excel Partnership. That development project, funded by the U.S. Department of Ed I3 program, was to develop a model of shared responsibility for student success in foundational math courses. Foundational math courses meant Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Algebra Functions and Data Analysis, and Geometry. And the concept of shared responsibility was that parents, teachers, community organizations would perform some very specific functions to support student learning in these foundational math courses. I'll indicate in a minute exactly why those courses are so critical for students in rural areas as we think about connecting what students learn, being successful, and what it means for the vitality of rural places, rural development, and the students' economic prosperity as well. Next slide, we see information about the specific functions then in this particular model. This was one of two I3 projects I directed recently. This one was 5 years. The teachers were to do two specific things in their responsibility role. One was to integrate Khan Academy or TED Ed web-based videos into lessons as homework assignments. It turned out we used Khan Academy. We did not have to create any particular TED Ed videos, so the teachers used Khan Academy videos. Second thing the teachers were to do was to conduct a family math night or forum at the beginning of each semester. Those were the two functions specifically that teachers were to do. We see then in the next slide specific functions of parents. They had 3, and by the way, you'll note this is not requiring them to teach their kid algebra at home, to help their kid with algebra. And that's critical because many people, whether they have advanced degrees or whether they have a high school education only, helping their son or daughter with algebra can be very problematic. So we were doing things that most people would agree parents can do. One was to reinforce that their child complete the videos and the assessments in the home environment. The second was that they participate with the child in the family math nights. And third, that they reinforce in the child and family and attend this thing called a community STEM career event that, as you see in the next slide, the community had as the specific responsibility. So 3 groups had role responsibilities, and the rural community had a specific function. We wanted community-based organizations, businesses, faith-based nonprofits, 4-H cooperative extension, come together as a team and perform these specific functions. We wanted them to plan STEM career events that would reinforce the need for students to learn math for success in at least a technician level kind of occupation important to the rural region. Now, this is critical because we know most of the jobs in rural America are going to be at the technician level. So we have to get students ready in high school to earn some sort of post-secondary credential, at least a technician. And there again, we're quick to point out, while in schools they typically tell you to take as much math as you can get, that is not the case for the kinds of jobs that are going to be available in these higher STEM kind of occupations. And if we encouraged everybody to get a bachelor's degree, we know that's facilitating people to leave rural America. It's not that we don't want people to get the most education possible. Whatever they desire, we encourage. But if they're trying to get education for living in the rural area and they want better paying occupations, then the STEM career field is the one we want them to focus on, as well as other areas, of course, but at least some post-secondary education related to being a technician. That will be what supports their own prosperity and regional economic development. And so the team was to conduct these STEM career events at a county fair or some other county or community venue, preferably not a public school. And the reason for that is many of the parents may not have had a good experience when they were in school. And so the concern was get out where the people are, where they're more comfortable, if you can. In some cases, that wasn't the case. There were 6 school systems involved in this project, and some were able to hold it at a community college or other places. Some had to hold the event at their school because it was the only place in the county that could accommodate the activity. Moving to the next slide, some reasons why this model of shared responsibility was important. Regardless of where a student chooses to live, they must be able to pursue this higher skill, higher paying kind of career in STEM H kind of fields to learn appropriate competencies. It must prepare them at least at the technician kind of occupation and career. Other reasons we see in the next slide, students must enroll in these advanced high school STEM courses required for entering this post-secondary program and to attain an industry recognized credentials. So high school must begin to prepare people for that. And obviously, as many people in our audience know, algebra is a major barrier. Many students have a bad experience in algebra, and consequently, it keeps them from being in the pipeline to take the appropriate courses that enable them then to be successful in the post-secondary experience. They consequently choose not to enter the field. We're particularly concerned about females. We need many more females in the STEM fields other than health. And all of this effort collectively makes a big difference. So in the next slide, the additional reason, of course, too, is that today, certainly in the past, but obviously today, where many rural communities are under major transition, they know jobs of the past are not jobs of the future. Schools and teachers need the active engagement of parents and communities in motivating students to value and succeed in these foundational math courses. So teachers and schools can't do it alone. It takes these other organizations to convince students, to motivate students that math is important, that while those jobs may not have been in the rural area before that required algebra, many of the ones in these STEM fields now in the future do. As we go to the next slide, some key lessons learned from our project, the Rural Math Excel Partnership Project. The math required to work in the STEM-H technician occupations may be different than what students learn in school. You'll see shortly, as I give you some references you can go to or some resources, we wrote an article from our efforts in collecting information from STEM-H technicians. We brought between 35 and 40 technicians from the regional workforce to tell us what's the math you really use. And we found there were 4 kinds of math gaps. We also found that in most cases, it was 7th and 8th grade math and maybe some algebra, depending on the technician occupation. But telling students to get all the math they possibly can, and it will eventually do you some good somewhere, is not a good strategy. A second thing learned, web-based family math night activities may increase if we can provide parents and teachers a way to do those using technology. In other words, particularly since we were focused at the high school level, students or parents are busy, teachers are busy, it's an add-on. And so at the end of the project, we focused on putting many of these activities that they would do in the family math night online, web-based. And we were just at the stage when the project ended of beginning to realize that that was the path most viable to increase that role function of parents and teachers at the family math night. We also, you see in item 3 here, that we created a specific student activity that teachers would assign called Math at Work in our community. We needed that to get parents to be more engaged with students, to be engaged with business and others in the community. So students would interview people in the business community. They would ask their parent, who do they know that uses math in the workplace? You didn't have to work in the community, but you had to live in the community because many people in rural areas work outside the local community. So this was a way to find out from people who lived in the community how they use math. The students did interviews, and then the community event team used the results of that to plan the community event. So we saw that as important, knowing we had to increase the communications between the student, the parent, the business sector, and others in the community, because we were trying to change a culture in many rural places where people did not see in the past math as important to success in the workplace. So that became a very important activity for students to do that engaged parents and business people and others. Another key lesson learned was it takes the collective action of teachers, parents, and the families and the community to provide the support students need for success. So the whole concept behind the project was that working together, these entities could do some very specific functions that collectively would benefit students. For more information, you can go to the Rural Math Excel Partnership Resource page at this particular website. It was the Virginia Advanced Study Strategies, a nonprofit organization that operated the project, received the funding from the U.S. Department of Ed, and there were 6 school districts, all rural, involved. You can see the article about the math gap that explains the kind of math, what the technicians said, and so forth, and it would be very valuable to people who know they need to be sharing with students, and schools need to be sharing with students. If you want to work in STEM fields, here's the kind of math you really need to learn, not just any math and all the math that you can take. That's not good advice. There are 2 videos that you can also access easily by going to the website you see listed under item 3 here. One is a Welcome Project overview that we developed based after the first summer conference that we held. Gives a lot of excellent information about the project. And then there was a final project video where we included 2 additional sites as demonstration sites to use some of the last products and so forth developed near the end of the project. So you can access that video and learn more about it as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Hobart. This takes us to our second poll. And while I'm teeing that up, I think if we have any LCAN members on the line, a lot of the work that you're going to hear about today, there is a lot of collaboration that personally reminds me of a lot of the LCAN work that's happening across the state of Florida. So our poll should be launching. About 24 coming in right now, 24%. So what component of the shared responsibility model of RMEP is the most important? Give you a few more seconds. All right, we're going to close that off and share the results. So Hobart, most of our attendees today thought that all of the above. Any take on that?
Great. That's the answer, certainly. That takes all of those folks. So with that knowledge as well, I wanted to be sure and share with you this personalized text messages approach. There's not a lot I want to say about it because you folks are fortunate in Florida that you have FCAN. They are a part of this National College Access Network, and you see the URL there where you can go read more about this personalized text message concept. That is, it's called nudges. In the next slide, we give you some basic information. You see where it's focused on increasing the financial form filing that students, when they need to apply for financial aid, it's focused on college enrollment and the persistence among at-risk student populations, which obviously the rural students fit in. The research finds the most modest positive effects are on the completion of the pre-matriculation task, the completion or submission of that form, and college enrollment. On the next slide, we see a couple other items. They've learned from the early evidence of nudges, that is, using personalized text messages with students, that the largest effects are with students less immediate access to college transition resources or college counselors. Again, that certainly fits most of our students in rural areas, as does the last item in terms of who benefits most. Research reveals it's the low-income students and first-generation students who presumably do not have family or friends with college access knowledge. So being a first-time college goer and so forth, which many of our students are in rural areas, many of them also fit the low income. So this, I wanted to make you aware of the concept of personalized text messages, nudges, that's evolving across the country, and hope you'll explore that. And I know FCAN is a good resource for you to follow up on that. Now we're going to move to Matthew and hear about the great project he has underway in your state of Florida called Camp Osprey.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Harman. So Camp Osprey, CAMP stands for the Collegiate Achievement Mentoring Program, and it's a program that actually started back in 2008 at the University of Florida as Camp Gator, and expanded to NC State as Camp PAC, and now at the University of North Florida, it's seen its greatest success as Camp Osprey. So it's a program where college students from throughout the colleges, various majors, career paths, they take a leadership course within the Taylor Leadership Institute as part of their leadership minor that they are pursuing at UNF. And rather than a traditional classroom setting, the students are called upon to mentor students in high poverty rural schools in these same leadership skills. We know the research shows that when people teach something, they know it better, and we found that students participating in this program really get to hone in on their leadership skills and their growth as a leader when they're mentoring students in these same skills. So what makes this program unique? It really comes down to the focus on leadership development. And the idea of those soft skills and those career building skills that many schools are not addressing. So one of the things that we found is that when students have access to leadership development, where they're building their confidence, becoming an advocate for themselves, focusing on time management, goal setting, and really building soft skills, everything from a handshake to a resume, really become essential not only for our college students who are teaching these skills, but to their apprentices that they're helping in the communities. And many of our rural schools have been so appreciative of these partnerships because these are opportunities that without this network, they would never have the opportunity to meet some of these needs of their students. So as our program expanded, our demand became so high in our rural communities, and many of them, because of geographic and financial barriers, we couldn't get out to their communities and they couldn't come to UNF up here in Jacksonville, Florida. So we started to implement the use of virtual mentoring between our coaches and our apprentices. And here's an actual photo of one of our sessions taking place with students in Palatka, rural community within Putnam County at Mellon Elementary School. And those are students on the other end of that screen at UNF and participating in the same type of mentoring that we would typically have face-to-face, but through virtual mentoring, we were able to do it and reach communities that otherwise we wouldn't have the chance to reach. So why did we start this? One of the reasons we really wanted to make sure that we reached communities that needed us the most. We really wanted to reach out to communities that maybe couldn't get to our campus or didn't in many ways have the technology capabilities to do some high-level video conferencing as part of our virtual mentoring. We've even partnered with schools to allow teachers using their cell phones and mobile apps and iPads, and it didn't require a full computer lab or high bandwidth. It could be something as simple as a cell phone that we're able to connect with these communities and these students and really build relationships between our college students and these students in these rural communities. And going back to Dr. Johnson's point of one of the most important factors of that college readiness and awareness are those campus visits. It really opened us up to do the really implement the virtual campus visit, which has turned out to be one of our most effective tools to bring campus to many of our rural communities. With a simple cell phone, our mentors and our leadership coaches are taking students to visit their classrooms, athletic events, resources on campus, everything from meeting with admissions folks and financial aid to faculty member. And one of the coolest things we've tried to do is implement a match with our rural students here at UNF, who are current college students, with their home communities, to really bring this back to the idea of giving back and not leaving their community, but helping to bring up those back where they call home. Some of the impact pieces that we've been able to glean from these partnerships in rural communities, we've seen some increasing gains in terms of student attendance and academic achievement, which is why we have such a strong wait list right now of people who want to be a part of this. And student attendance was one of the first things we looked at, because we found that to be one of the strongest indicators of both short and long-term success for our students. Here's a great statement from one of our partner principals who we're continually working with. He's now at Crescent City in Putnam County. It really comes down to learning skills that will help them overcome obstacles. And one of the nice things too, as our rural students and apprentices are going through this program, these same skills are being learned and really exhibited by our college students. So they're getting just as much out of it, if not more, from this program. So it's really a mutually beneficial partnership. And speaking of partnerships, one of the things that we also try to accentuate is making sure that this is mutually beneficial. So it's not just the university telling the rural communities what needs to happen. It's really building in those open lines of communication, saying, hey, what do we both need here? As you can see some of the photos in this slide, we have our virtual mentoring going on. We have our campus visits, face-to-face campus visits, when our rural students can come up to campus and visit and partake in interactive activities. Here we have some young ladies participating in a tennis clinic from the UNF women's tennis team. But one of the most amazing events we had, and many of the students still talk about this even after a few years have passed, is when we had our college students, our UNF students, go down to a rural community and really learn about the school, the community, the context of where their apprentices were living and learning. These are photos of our mentors and leadership coaches going down to JCPenney and going shopping to help prep their apprentices for their campus visit. So after a school visit, they got the chance to really get to see the rural community, and it helped to really enlighten some of the understandings of our college students. So it's truly mutually beneficial. Here are some resources that you can take a look at in one of the handouts that went out. It shows the power of this partnership with the university and the rural communities. Our program continues to grow. We even outside of Florida, we have a partnership with a rural community in Texas right now that they're looking at continuing virtually mentoring with us. We continue to get great support from the community to support these initiatives. So it's one of those things that people are seeing the power of this work, and especially seeing the need in the rural communities, which is very refreshing for folks in this area. So we're looking forward to continued expansion, and the idea that this can be replicated. It has been, and it can be something that fits in any place where there are university or state college resources to be shared.
All right, and that takes us to our third and final poll question. So if you were to look at the Osprey model that Matthew just shared about, and you were going to put it in your local community, and I know the poll has not come up yet, it says it's in the process of distributing, we want to know what this would look like. It's Still distributing. Okay, it's up. So remember that the coach is that UNF, that college student, and the apprentice is the K through 12 student. So as you're collecting, the first option would be coach, as Matthew mentioned, with the Osprey model, college student, coach, apprentice, K through 12. Second option has business and community members as the coach, and again, K-12 students as the apprentice. And the last one is school staff as the coach, and the students again as the apprentice. All of them would work in your community right now. Or if you have another great idea that's not listed here, please select that and then email us later because we want to hear about it. So it looks like we have about 50% in. I'll give you another minute. All right. So it looks like most folks think that that Osprey model would work, or all of the above. Any thoughts, Matthew?
Well, it's interesting, and it's very refreshing to see that model could be replicated. And like I said, the nice thing about it, it's a no-cost model that we've been able to establish, and love to hear more from folks through the questions. I'm intrigued with I have another great idea not listed here, so I'd love to hear some more ideas of what this model may look like, because it's one thing that we love to hear of how to expand our work, but also make it better. So this is great.
All right. So that concludes their portion of the presentation. And right now we're going to open up the questions in a few minutes. So please send your questions in so that we can address them in a moment. So again, shameless plug, we are really excited. The 2019 FCAN Summit is right around the corner. This year's theme is Candid Conversations, and we're going to take a deep dive in equity issues in education and access to post-secondary education in Florida. So we want you to save the date. It's May 7th and 8th. Oh, that should say 2019. I haven't updated that yet, at the Rosen Center in Orlando, Florida. Registration will open in January. If you want to be the first to know when registration opens, you can, log on to our website when you want, or we encourage you to join our mailing list, so you'll get that right away. And Jerry, Hobart, and Matthew are going to be at this year's summit doing an even deeper dive into these issues to help support rural students across Florida. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. It doesn't look like we have any coming in yet, but I actually have a question for you, Matthew. You touched a little bit on the effects that you're seeing on the college students who are interacting with these K through 12 students in the local rural communities. Can you talk a little bit more about that, especially since they are taking leadership coursework along with it? And it seems that these students are going to go become leaders across the state. So what have they learned from participating in the program?
Kimberly, that's a great question. Right now, we're actually doing some significant research on the college student. For years, we were constantly looking at the apprentice in the rural communities in those K through 12 students. But now what we're finding is that the students that are participating in their role as these leadership coaches, they're actually seeing gains in terms of their academic improvement, their ability to manage their time. They're seeing higher likelihoods of graduation. They're seeing higher likelihoods of employment. It's in our case study that we've been looking at so far. So it's really powerful, and it really aligns with a lot of the research around college students that Jerry mentioned, the idea of social adjustment. When students feel like they're a part of something, attached to something, they're more likely to continue and succeed. And one of the cool things that we do with our program is the students, when they're on campus, when they're part of the program, they're wearing the Camp Osprey t-shirts. They get to nominate another person to fill in for them in the next semester. So it really becomes almost like a select group, a select club. And they take great pride in it there, and they even stay connected to their apprentice even after the semester has ended. So it's really one of the things that we're finding. We have a lot more research to do on it, but the initial findings are very powerful for those college students.
Thanks. And Margie has a question also about Camp Osprey. She wants to know how many schools do partner with Camp currently, and how do you choose those schools or those students that you partner with?
Currently, we are in 7 schools right now throughout the Southeast. Actually, we had as many as 15 throughout the region, but because of our bandwidth and making sure that the quality of our product stayed high, we whittled that down to some really strong partner schools. And I think how the way that we select them really comes down to a willingness to be a partner with us, making sure that there is a dedicated staff person that could facilitate any questions we might have, or someone who is really vested in the idea of leadership development for their students. And we're open to any new school that wants to be a part of this network. And we'd love to hear more.
And following up on that, someone has a question about, do you have case studies, anecdotes about what it was like to expand into those other states? And when those other states come on, are there any expectations or obligations that you have, to keep, I guess it's the integrity of the program to make sure that you're delivering the best program that you can, the best mentoring to these students?
That's a great question. And as we've expanded, one of the things we wanted to make sure is the quality of the experience. Whether it's face to face or virtual, that there's still both the coach and the apprentice are really getting the most out of the experience. We actually, since the program has gone on for so long, we've come up with over the years some best practices in terms of activities and strategies. And we recently, through partnership with Sage, actually have a textbook that we use, an activity book, so that the activities that we're doing with students in Milford, Texas, are the same as what we're doing in Palatka, Florida. So they're really getting, it's almost like a franchise model. So they're getting the same experience, whether you're local or whether you're 3 states away. So it's one of those things that we've learned from experience. We couldn't dilute the product or take away from the experience in our quest to help as many kids as possible. Instead, we wanted to make sure that the kids that we were working with on both ends, the college students and the K through 12 students, had the best experience. So that's where that set curriculum came in, and we've been using that for the past 2 years, and the impact has been extremely beneficial in terms of the outcomes, but also in terms of the efficiency of the program. So we're not scrambling to look for, hey, do you want to try this activity or that activity? We have a set of go-to activities that we're constantly adding to based on experiences from our partners.
And Madeline had a question. I think you may have mentioned this. Are the students, the college students who participate, are they paid for this mentorship? I don't think so, but did they receive college credit?
They do not get paid for it. It's actually part of an academic course, so it's college credit for it. So that way, rather than a big brother, big sister type mentoring program where it was service based or community service hours, which oftentimes when we did research before even starting our program on some of the pitfalls of other programs, we wanted to make sure that there was some accountability built in. So that's where the academic piece comes in. Their final grade is based on their commitment as a leadership mentor, and especially where when you see the need in these rural communities. We took a lot of pride in the fact that the highest attendance rates for our students came when the days that they were being mentored. So the rural students knew that their mentor was going to be there, whether it be face to face or virtually, and they were there. We heard from many teachers saying they should have stayed home, but they didn't want to miss that time with their collegiate mentor / coach. So that's one of the things that accountability was key.
Thanks. So this one is for Jerry. Michelle would like to know, is there a link to that literature review that you put together? So did you write a paper about it? Is it hosted anywhere? And where can she access some of that material other than on your slides?
For now, I could just share it with her via email. It has not been published, and we will probably be publishing a final version on the website for our institute at UCF, but I'd be happy to share a draft version in the meantime.
Great. So Michelle, Jerry's email is there. If not, I can connect you afterward. And Jerry and Hobart, while we have about 6 minutes, 5 minutes left, can you spend a few minutes talking about the Institute and how the Institute can be a resource to people practicing in Florida and across the country?
Sure, I'll start, and then Hobart, you can fill in.
Great, sure. Go ahead.
One of the things that we know is that the kind of collection of rural education scholars who do serious work in this field are scattered and spread out across the country. And the Institute represents a way for us to bring those people together, to bring their thinking together and do work that can have an impact on rural education broadly, and doing it virtually. So it's a virtual institute without having to build a building and bring 20 new people to Orlando to work at UCF. So using that as a platform, we're pursuing various kinds of projects related to research and innovation and practice, and looking to move forward an agenda to support rural schools and communities through those three domains of work. Hobart?
One of the key areas, as you see in the title of the Institute, is this concept of innovation. We're in a time of great innovation, of course, in our society and around the world, but innovation has always been a particular important interest in rural areas, usually out of necessity. And most people are familiar with the concept of do more with less. So there's tremendous amounts of innovation occurring, but unfortunately, very little of it ends up in the literature. And so part of the interest is, just like today, sharing some of the things we know that's occurring out there, like Matthew's project, like the Rural Math Excel Partnership, projects that are specific to rural context. Too often, a school improvement initiative that started and so forth is based on evidence from what occurred in an urban area where something was developed. So it's not that we can't learn from what's developed in urban areas, but we need much more information shared from what's occurring in rural areas. So our innovation focus is on that. How do we gather that information? How do we participate in some innovation projects? I'm working currently with an intermediate unit in Pennsylvania that has 35 school districts. We're in the process of developing an innovation that's going to be very important for collaboration. And together then, research and innovation and the concept of practice you see in the titles. How can we get more things into schools that are based on research evidence, where innovation has a unique importance and relevance to a rural context, but it's practical. It's what people need in rural areas. And in reality, it's people in rural areas creating those. And that's the particular focus I'm working on in Pennsylvania, where we start with the innovations that are already occurring in the schools and helping them better expand those, scale them into other school districts, and improve their innovation. So we're about research, innovation, and practice specific to rural ed, and we're excited about the work. And as you can tell, we're so glad too that Matthew has become part of our interest in terms of a program that probably has a lot of potential for Florida and other places.
All right. Well, it looks like we have some few more questions, but we don't have enough time to answer all of them. So if your question was not answered, I will follow up with you after the webinar is over. And if it needs to be connected to one of these three gentlemen, I will make that introduction. So on behalf of FCAN, we thank you so much for joining us today in what is set to be our final webinar for the 2018 year. And we hope that you connect again with Jerry, Hobart, or Matthew as needed. And again, these slides will be available by the end of the week. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.